Okay, so hello everybody again, and thank you for joining us for this session. It's going to be a question and answer session, very open, more like a discussion, not really a course, but more an opportunity to talk a bit about this process of diffusion. And the idea was also to give you an opportunity to see how PracticeGround, the courses that we offer on PracticeGround function when we use our online platform. So you can see here the slide that I'm going to use to present a bit the diffusion and get our discussion started. If you are in front of your screen, you should see me also. I could turn off the camera like that if I wanted, and I can turn it on again. Here today we probably won't use too much your camera, but if you have a camera, when you talk, when you use your microphone, we can have a conversation like on Skype. When it's small groups, like 6 to 8, we can really exchange as if we were in the same room, so it's very convenient, especially when we do role plays. It's really very, very convenient. We can do role plays with people who are on the other side of the world, literally, so it's really an interesting experience. I see that most of you have microphones that are plugged. I unmuted your microphone to avoid background noise, but if you want to use that at some point, what you can do is use the chat window and just say, like, the microphone, like to speak, and I will unmute your microphone. Otherwise, what you can do simply is type your questions and comments. I'm going to write here a little message here so that you can see it in case you missed it earlier. So you can type your questions, your comments at any points during this discussion today. This way, it's not going to interrupt the flow of our discussion, and I can go check once in a while to see what you've been posting. Okay. So we're going to get started with talking about diffusion today. So I don't know your background, if you're completely new to ACT. I recognize some names here, so I know that some of you are familiar with ACT. The idea of a Q&A like that today is that we try to be pretty open with the level of attendees, obviously. So I'll try to, I received actually a fair amount of questions since we posted the announcements for the Q&A. And I'm actually taking the questions out right now. So I'll get started first with telling you a little bit about PracticeGround, so that, because I know that some of you wanted to know a bit more how the ACT and RFT track works. So just a few minutes. So let's see. So if you've never visited the PracticeGround website, it's practiceground.org. I put it here, just a picture of the page where we present the learning community tracks. You see there's a couple of videos and samples from the track. So if you want to have a sense of how the training functions, I encourage you to go check that out. There is also some videos. In fact, if you go there, you'll see in the menu Learning Communities. Then you can check the overview. There's a little bit of a video, short video, that presents how the learning community functions and all the advantages of joining the community. Then specific tracks here that, as I said, that's the page here that you can, where you will see the details of each track. There's a video by each presenter that tells you more of the contents of the track. And then there's a page to register. You can register until the end of August. I think the exact date is on the website. And if you want more information, if you have more questions, you can contact either Cathy Patricelli, here you see her email here, works with us at PracticeGround, or directly me for the ACT and the RFT track. All right, so let's get started and talk about fusion and diffusion. So to talk about diffusion, I think it's helpful to explain a little more first what is fusion, the process of fusion. If you're familiar with ACT, you know that we generally present ACT with 6 processes of psychological flexibility and psychological inflexibility. So on the inflexibility side, we talk about avoidance, attachment, fusion, loss of contact with the present moment, lack of values, etc. So fusion, well, I would say that there are 3 main aspects in fusion. The idea is that in fusion, we act under the influence of thoughts, or what we say in RFT, verbal or symbolic sources of influence or control. But in more everyday language, we'd say that I have a thought and I act upon that thought according to what this thought says. And so what happens is that these thoughts override the influence of other variables. Okay, so let's say, for example, that 5 minutes before this presentation, I had the thought that I was not well prepared for this discussion, that I should have prepared more, and that therefore I should perhaps cancel it, say that I was, you know, that I would just call sick because I felt too much anxiety and feel unprepared. That could be a thought that I have right now, and that would override other variables, like, for example, the satisfaction I could get from actually making this presentation, because in this moment, 5 minutes before presentation, the only thing that I can think of is that I am anxious about it. So you see that it overrides other sources of influence. It doesn't have to be, it's not thoughts over, no, it's not just about being in your mind, in your thoughts. It can be a thought over other thoughts. So it's a thought that overrides the influence of other variables, including other thoughts. For example, 5 minutes before the presentation, maybe I also have the thought that I would really like to make this presentation, that I would like to meet new people to talk about diffusion. So these thoughts that we could say in ACT are more value-based are overridden by the thoughts that I'm too anxious, not prepared enough. I see that I have a question from Sanria that says, will we have access to a PowerPoint? Yes, thank you for asking. I will post the slides on our website with the audio recording, so that this way you'll be able to check that out later again. And if you are attending if you're listening to this recording after, you will still be able to follow and look at the slide. Yeah, you're welcome, San. Okay, so that's an aspect, the idea that the thought overrides the influence of other variables. Another aspect in fusion is this idea that the range of possible actions is restricted. So there's a loss of flexibility. The range of things that I can do in presence of these thoughts is limited. So again, if I use my example of being anxious, feeling not prepared before this presentation, if I am fused with the thoughts that I am not prepared, I should cancel, it would probably be reflected by me avoiding the session. I cannot, for example, consider different options. There is only one thing that I think I can do. That's pretty typical of, for example, if you have clients who have difficulty with PTSD symptoms, for example, you may have observed that they can be words or phrases that tend to trigger certain reactions, like, for example, talking about an assault, even just a word, you can see in their attitude, in their way of responding in the room, in the exchange, that's literally their flexibility physically even gets limited. Perhaps a moment before they were able to exchange, to smile, to look in different directions, to make movements with their body, and as soon as the topic gets brought up, it's like really their whole body gets contracted. So you see this idea of loss of flexibility. The range of things that we can do gets restricted. And the last main aspect of fusion is the loss of contact with values. So it's not just that I act upon a thought over other sources of influence. It's not just that my action is limited in terms of flexibility. It's also that my response is inconsistent with my values. So acting upon that thought with certain rigidity, loss of flexibility, makes me takes me away from my values. Okay. So for example, if I decided to cancel my my session today, acting upon the thought I am not prepared enough, I should cancel, I might have felt a little better at the beginning because the anxiety would have decreased. But then probably I would have been disappointed with myself. I felt bad because I actually really wanted to be here with you for this discussion. Okay, do you have any questions at this point? Some thoughts you need to clarify a bit what these three main ideas in Fusion. Again, if you would like to just type a question or comment on the chat window, or if you'd like the microphone, you can just type microphone or I'd like to speak. No? Okay. Well, like I said, if anything comes later, you can just type your question. I won't interrupt the discussion. I will go check your questions a bit later. Okay, so here's a sort of illustration of this principle of fusion, quite similar to what I was saying. What I would like you to see is how a behavior is potentially under the influence of multiple sources of control, sources of influence, and that these sources of control of influence sort of battle among each other, right? There's a sort of battle, and at each moment, potentially you could go in different directions depending on what is influencing you the most. So like here, this person who has perhaps some social anxiety, thinking of a presentation, he has to do, and you see that there's multiple sources of influence potentially. He thinks that people are going to laugh at him. He has some stomach pain, so that's a source of influence that it's not verbal, it's not a thought, it's a sensation. But the way I interpret this sensation can also be considered a thought and has an influence. This sensation is horrible. If instead I thought just, well, there's just a sensation that's not something I necessarily have to respond to, the thought is different and the influence can be different. On the other side, it's really important for me to present this work. I will be disappointed if I don't go. So you see there is a potential for going in different directions, either value-based or more linked to a sort of a short-term satisfaction or relief. And depending on what will have most influence, we see here if the thoughts around avoiding the idea that sensation is too bad, horrible, unbearable. If these thoughts take more space than the thoughts that could take this client, this person, more toward his values, then we would talk about fusion. Why? Because there is a thought, or a couple of thoughts that are influencing this person's behavior over other sources of influence. There is a restriction of the range of possible action, and it takes this person away from his values, providing that making this presentation is what matters, of course. So let's talk about diffusion now. And we're going to use these three main ideas about fusion to target then use diffusion and try to increase flexibility in responding to these thoughts. I use here this little diagram. It's a sort of a variation of tools used in ACT, like the matrix, the choice point, lifeline, where we like to represent effective behaviors on a line, so you can see this vertical line that goes to values. If I walk on this line, if I am on this line, it means that I am acting according to my values. Okay, so that's pretty much where I would like to be. On the right and on the left, you have what could be called like away moves or ineffective behaviors when I act in a way that's not consistent with my values. So it could be on the left side when I avoid things. So, for example, I avoid my anxiety, which is reinforcing. That's why I put R minus. So it's negative reinforcement. It's reinforcing to avoid my anxiety, but it takes me away from my values. On the right side, I can do things that provide some satisfaction, some positive satisfaction, but it also takes me away from my values. So some examples could be like feeling in control or wanting attention, or using drugs that enhance my performance or sensation that I may be positively reinforcing, but it actually takes me away from my values. Okay, so in both cases, there is some reinforcement, but it takes me away from what I care about in the longer term. So here an example is an antecedent. I wake up in the morning and I feel tired. And I have the thoughts, I don't want to get up, I feel tired, and I don't want to feel tired at work, I feel so tired to go to work. So you see how a thought pops up in response to a sensation, and then I decide to stay in bed. Okay, so that's the response to the thoughts, I don't want to get up and feel tired at work, I decide to stay in bed. So that's where the fusion happens. It's not having the thoughts that is fusion. Having the thought is fine. The problem is if I respond to these thoughts in a way that is not compatible with my values, providing that what I care about is to go to work, but in this moment, I am over-influenced by, I say over because I respond to these thoughts over other sources of influence, like, for example, it's all the reasons why it might be important for me to go to work. Make money, provide for my family, and maybe all the kinds of things that I enjoy about work. But in this very moment, the only thing that I am influenced by is that thought that I don't want to be tired. And you see the results is that I don't think of working anymore. I'm not tired, but it takes me away from my values. So when we're going to work on diffusion, I'm going to use 3 steps. It's not necessarily 3 chronological steps, but it's a little easier to think of it as if it was chronological. But in practice, it doesn't have to be necessarily in that order. So in step 1, what we want is to increase awareness, help clients notice first their pattern of response to their thoughts. We want them to notice that first they woke up and then feel tired, and then they have the thoughts that they didn't want to go to work, and that then they responded by staying in bed. That might seem obvious like that, just, oh yeah, of course, I was there, you know, so I know the story. But the thing is, if you don't slow down a little bit, you don't realize that the little components, more micro components of a behavioral sequence. And that's really important because these micro components influence our actions, and we are not necessarily aware of it. In fact, it's pretty typical. I mentioned that you've noticed that in your practice, that clients will not even notice that they have thoughts. For us, psychologists or therapists, we are used to thinking that we have emotions, thoughts, sensations. So we've learned to notice these variables and how we respond to these variables. But for most people, you know, it's just things happening as in a flow, and they don't necessarily notice all these variables and the influence that they can have on their way of responding. So I put here some examples, typical examples of ACT exercises that can help increase the skill of noticing thoughts and responses to thoughts. For example, the Kobe Hauling exercise that consists of writing all the thoughts that come up during, for example, 1 or 2 minutes. It's already a lot for 1 or 2 minutes, so we have a lot of thoughts. You just write it down on a sheet of paper, on a whiteboard, to train yourself to notice the flow of thoughts. And what often happens is that people will say, "Oh, I don't have thoughts. I don't know what to write right now." And you can say, "Well, that's a thought. You can write that. I don't have a thought, or I don't know what to write." So and you write that. That helps notice that thinking is constantly going on even when we are not aware of it. The leaves on the stream exercise, pretty typical exercise in ACT, but there are different versions of it in other mindfulness therapies. So the idea is to imagine that you're sitting beside a river, stream, and that you're seeing some leaves floating by, and every time you have a thought, you put it on the leaves and you let it go. So it helps you notice the process of thinking. Even exercises like the raisin exercise in NBSR, in BCT, it's meant to develop our ability to slow down and to observe an object with more attention, to develop our awareness. You take a raisin, you eat it, it goes fast. You know that you ate the raisin, that you didn't notice all the more, like I was saying earlier, the micro aspects of the raisin and eating the raisin. So the point is not to become an expert in eating raisins, of course. It's more to just use a concrete object to observe, because at least you can look at the raisin, you can touch it, you can taste it, and so progressively it shapes an ability to do it with things that are more abstract, like thoughts and sensations. So I have a question here from Cynthia. Why is the X for didn't think of work anymore? It's placed on the upper square closer to values. Yeah, so that's because in this diagram, I didn't represent it here, but what's below the horizontal axis is what's concrete out of the skin, whereas what's above the horizontal axis has more to do with mental experiences, so thoughts, sensations. I didn't show it here in detail because that was not the main purpose here. If you look at tools like the metrics, that's how they actually created that system, where what they call mental experiences are above the horizontal axis, and what's more like concrete, what you can observe outside your body. It's a bit practical categories. It's not like there is a true fundamental difference, but because thoughts, sensations, emotions are a little more difficult to observe, they are more abstract. It's not like objects that we can put on a table and look at. It can help create these categories so that you can become more aware. You learn to discriminate these different variables. So that's the only reason why it's there here. Okay, so that's the first step, and I put example of exercises, but it doesn't have to be done through formal exercises. Simply asking questions, when you talk with a client just about something that happened. Oh, you didn't go to work, what happened? Tell me a bit, take me back to that morning when you woke up. So DBT therapists do that very well. They're really well trained to do what we call chain analysis. So it consists of looking at step-by-step, slowing down, and try to identify all the little variables that might be influencing a response, both in terms of antecedent, what happened before the response. So this includes sensations, feelings, and thoughts that precede the response, and then the consequences. What happened as a result of staying in bed. So that can be done also very informally. In fact, at each moment of an exchange, I basically do that work of increasing awareness of a behavioral sequence. Okay, the second step, and as I said earlier, it's not necessarily chronological, but it makes sense to look at it that way, at least for teaching purpose. The second step is to assess the effectiveness of responses to thoughts. Remember what I said earlier, fusion is not about having a thought, even if it's a very rigid thought, like I'm always stupid, you are you never pay attention to me. So that seems like a rigid thought because it's a very all or nothing statement, but it's not, that's not how we define fusion in ACT and RFT. We define fusion based on the response to this thought. Because I might think that I am a very bad trainer, for example, but not act upon this thought. I might just be something that I'm used to thinking because I am not a very self-confident person. I am not a very self-confident person. Here's another thought that I have. But if I learn to respond with flexibility to that thought might still be there, perhaps a bit less, as I don't respond to it. But it's not, doesn't mean that I'm fused with it. So that's why it's important to assess the effectiveness of responses to thought. And how do we assess the effectiveness of responses to thought? Well, based on the gap or the consistency, inconsistency with values. Not going to work because I feel tired is not necessarily an act of fusion. It could be that I am really too tired, that maybe I'm sick, that I need to take care of myself first, and I decide actually to not go to work. That could be a values-based action, right? So you really have to think in terms of values, in terms of effectiveness. So what kind of exercises can we use to help clients assess the effectiveness of their responses to thoughts? Well, there's a lot of metaphors in ACT, like the passengers in the bus. Passengers in the bus consist of imagining that you're driving a bus toward your values, that's your destination. And in the back of the bus, there are all kinds of passengers that are making it hard for you to go in your direction, your chosen direction. They might say, go on the left, go on the right. They scream, they try to grab your arms to prevent you from driving. And so if you try to get rid of the passengers, you stop the bus, you get rid of them, or you struggle with them, you respond to them. What will happen is that you will be taken away from your direction. Because you stop, but the next stop, all the passengers come in, and so it's a never-ending job. And while you're struggling with them, you're not driving. So the idea is that you engage in behaviors to try to basically respond to these passengers, these thoughts, but it's not effective. Meanwhile, you're not driving your bus. Other metaphors like the feeding the tiger or quicksand metaphors. All these metaphors are meant to help clients notice the counterproductivity of trying to control their emotions and thoughts, to try to avoid their anxiety, for example. Like in my example earlier, if I'm anxious before making a presentation and I have the thought that I'm not prepared, I should cancel, acting upon these thoughts might make me feel less anxious in the short term. So it's like feeding the tiger. It calms the tiger down for a while, but meanwhile the tiger gets bigger and bigger, and I have to feed him more and more and more, and it becomes more and more dangerous. So it's counterproductive. In a less formal way, so not using exercises, but more natural exchange in a conversation, asking questions about the workability, the effectiveness of a response. It's part of the diffusion work. So you said that you stayed in bed, and then how did you feel when you decided to stay in bed? So probably the client will say that they felt a little better in the short term. And then I keep asking about the effectiveness in the long term. So it actually overlaps with the work on awareness, because what we do is that we unfold the behavioral sequence. Okay, what happened next? What did you do during the whole day? Not working, staying in bed. And very likely, if it's not working, if it's an example of fusion, if it's an instance of fusion, the clients will mention probably consequences that are not desirable. I felt really bad after that. I had canceled my appointments at work. I got a call from my boss. He was mad at me because I didn't go to work. So I canceled the next day because I didn't want to face him, and so now I was fired. What you want to do is that with a lot of openness and curiosity, and the point is not to say, you see, it's not working, and to go too quickly to the ineffectiveness. It's likely that it's ineffective, but you don't have to rush. And I saw that some questions were posted this week. I will get to the questions after. But when clients are rigidly attached to their thoughts, when they say that diffusion doesn't work for them, in these cases, it's really helpful to be curious, open, to slow down, not try to go too fast in a sort of insight process. I prefer assuming that there is a good reason for doing even ineffective behaviors. To some extent, they are effective, but progressively we will explore to what extent this response is not effective. It's similar to what in DBT you do with a good balance between validation and change. Yeah, you also want to acknowledge that responses make sense because they're part of a learning history. The results of from a learning history, they're part of the behavioral repertoire that has been strengthened, and so it makes sense to engage in these responses. But on the other hand, we can work on recognizing that we have some control on our responses. Some control on our responses to thoughts. It's trickier to have control on our thoughts. We have some control on our thoughts, but we don't control our thoughts the same way as we can control our more concrete responses, like getting up. I can more easily control that than choosing not to feel tired, or choosing not to think that I am not prepared enough for a presentation. That's trickier. That's something that we learn with RFT, is how we can shape thinking, but without falling into the traps of excessive thought control and thought suppression. That's something we talk about in our RFT track if you're interested in this training. Okay, so the last step is to increase response flexibility. Okay, not necessarily directly doing the effective behavior, but even just increasing flexibility, being able to do a variety of actions in the presence of these thoughts. Now, if you remember what I said earlier about fusion, there is one of the dimensions of fusion is the losing flexibility, the restriction of the range of possible action. And so what we want to do is increase that flexibility. Different exercises in ACT, like one I like, it's very simple. You have a client walk in cycle and say out loud, I can't walk, I can't walk, I can't walk, I can't walk. So what's interesting is that when you do that, you shape the ability to engage in a behavior that contradicts a verbal statement, right? So I can say that I don't walk, and at the same time I walk. Take your mind for a walk is a more elaborated version of this exercise that consists of formulating thoughts out loud. So, for example, the therapist will play the mind of the client. That's why we say take your mind for a walk. To go for a walk, it could be outside or in the corridor, or even in a room if the room is big enough. And you, the therapist, produce all kinds of statements out loud, observations, like, for example, say, oh, it's the weather is beautiful today. So it's more like comments, evaluations, but also more like sort of invitations to act in a certain way. For example, sit on the chair, or jump, or open the door and go outside. Or even things that are more related to the themes that the clients might usually have. Like, for example, if I work with a client with obsessive-compulsive disorder, might formulate out loud urges to wash hands, for example. And the job of the client is to simply notice this the activity of the mind that is impersonated by the therapist, and not argue with the mind, and try to engage in a variety of behaviors, not necessarily based on what the mind says. So, for example, if I say the mind, I say sit on the chair, the client will choose to instead go check out the window and look at the view from the office. Or if I say jump, the client might sit. But not necessarily do something different. You can also choose to do what the mind says, because flexibility is not about doing always the opposite or something different from a thought. But it's easier to know flexibility when you do something different, obviously. So again, it's an exercise meant to increase flexibility in responding to the thought. The thought itself is not a problem, it's a response to the thought that can be a problem. Leaves on the stream is another exercise. In fact, we talked about it earlier for increasing awareness, but leaves on the stream is pretty good to do also for increasing flexibility, because the purpose is to put your thought on leaves and to let the leaves float on the stream. So you learn a different response. Instead of acting upon the thoughts, instead of being stuck with the thoughts, you let it go. Okay, so it's a different response to let a thought go rather than trying to get rid of it or trying to or acting upon the thoughts. In a less formal way, so not using formal exercises, but more like natural conversation techniques. Inviting clients to try something new, asking questions about topics that are usually avoided by your clients. So let's say you have a client who tends to avoid topics that trigger anxiety. Let's say, for example, a client with OCD or PTSD, and every time that the topic tends to get close to what triggers anxiety, the client tries to talk about something else or make very short answers. Asking the question again, gently, with compassion, and even acknowledging that it's a difficult topic, but instead of following the client on this different track, bringing them back to the topic. I noticed that you changed the topic of our conversation, and I noticed that you often do that when we start talking about what happened to you. I imagine that must be a very hard thing to talk about, and I kind of feel like not asking you more because I can see that it's hard for you. But at the same time, my experience working with clients who have similar difficulties tell me that it is helpful to actually explore these topics a little more together. So I wonder if you'd be willing to, at your own pace, of course, and you can of course choose to keep talking about it or not. But I wonder if you'd be willing to explore this topic a little more. See, that's just a way of trying to invite the clients to try something different. Basically, they come to see us in therapy with having tried things that are not working, and what we'd like them to do is something different. See, if they don't do something different, the results will be the same, of course. So invitations to do something different. It can also be by noticing when clients spontaneously do something a bit different. You notice some progress, or you notice that they're able to do something that is that contradicts some thoughts. For example, a client might say, oh, I was really close not to come today because I was really too tired, or I didn't want to talk about all this, and I almost so I was in the waiting room and I left, I went back to the car, and then I came back. That's interesting to notice because that's an instance of diffusion, right? It means that the client had some thoughts that telling her or him to leave or to not come, but they still came. so that shows that they actually diffuse. So helping them notice that they were able to engage in behavior that contradicted that thought, that was different, at least from that thought, is a good way of reinforcing naturally in the conversation to reinforce diffusion. San Miller, you're saying opposite action. Yes, in DBT, there's a technique to train clients to do something opposite to, I think, to the thought or to an emotion, or for example, smiling. I don't know exactly, I'm not training DBT, so I don't know if my examples are correct, but the idea is that you have an urge to do something and you actually train yourself. It's a bit arbitrary, but it's because it's for training purpose. The point is not to always do the opposite, of course. It doesn't mean that the opposite of your thought is always a good thing. But if you train yourself to do it, you will gain that flexibility. Think of it as gaining flexibility, muscle flexibility. You know, if some of you are yoga practitioners or even in kind of sports where you have to stretch a bit to gain flexibility, you know that well. It encourages you to do something that your body at first doesn't really want. You know, stretch your muscles, it's painful. So in a way, it's like opposite to what your body wants, but you gain flexibility, and that helps you then do not everything you want with your body, but more, right? You gain flexibility. Okay, so that's how we proceed, these 3 steps, and so eventually what we want is to be able to, when I have the thought, I don't want to get up and feel tired at work, if work is what matters in this moment, not respond to the thought in that way, but actually going back to work. So it's likely that you will respond to another thought, your values thoughts. I'm tired, but I really want to go to work because it's important. I don't want to lose my job, and there's actually a lot of things that I also look forward to at work if I notice also the positive things about work. So as I said earlier, diffusion is not about less thoughts. It's not necessarily like that. It's less influence from the thoughts that is currently having undesirable influence, right? Being able to notice, to assess, and engage in flexible responses will help us go back to our values, even in presence of that thought. The thought doesn't have to go away. You don't have to argue with the thought, but you can now respond differently. All right, so I'd like to, we have now about 45 minutes for the questions and comments. So what I'm going to do is take some questions here that were sent this past week, but you can also type your questions, especially after hearing this presentation, if there are questions or comments that you'd like to ask, to follow up. You can use the chat window here. Again, I'm going to type it here so you can find it in case you missed it earlier. You can type it here, or ask the microphone and I will give you the unmute you, and you can ask your question and make your comments live. Okay, so I'm going to look at some of the questions. So here's some questions. I tried to organize them by themes. What methods and or exercises are most effective when explaining diffusion for the first time to someone who is new to therapy? And also, there's another question that's similar or connected. How do you introduce this concept to clients? And do you actually introduce this concept? Do you explain it to them? So I think it's helpful to join these two questions. I don't necessarily use the term diffusion. I don't necessarily explain it, but I think the idea of noticing thoughts and how we respond to thoughts and if it's useful or not, yes, definitely. I don't necessarily use the concept, definitely don't use technical terms, but what so there's different ways. I don't necessarily have just one way. It depends on I guess the way that the client thinks, his his way of talking, his culture, her background. I try to use terms that resonate, okay? So I actually like all kinds of metaphors that we use in ACT, like Ross Harris' hand metaphor, when he uses that often in frustration to show that when you have your hand very close in front of your eyes, you cannot see anything but your hand. It's like a thought. When there's a thought that covers everything, you don't see all the other things that could influence you, all the other positive and negative things, but other things that could be useful. If you distance yourself a little bit from that hand, if you put that hand a little farther, you don't get rid of the hand. You need your hand, right? So it's part of the thing that you that you have, part of you. But if you distance yourself a little bit from the thought, then you start to see more. And if you start to see more, you have more options. Okay. Another metaphor that I really like, because it helps notice, it includes the three dimensions, I think, of fusion and diffusion. So the awareness, assessing effectiveness, and flexibility. I like to talk about thoughts as a toolbox. For example, you imagine you're a mechanic and you work on a car, and you're under your car, you know, and your toolbox is beside the car, so you cannot see your tools. You have to put your hand, you know, a bit blindly without knowing exactly which one you're taking. But imagine you need the hammer because you need this specific tool, and so you try to grab it, and when you look at it, what you grab, in fact, it was the screwdriver. Okay, that can happen if you don't see what inside the toolbox. So what happens if you grab the screwdriver? Well, you don't have the tool that you need. Okay, so it's like the thoughts. It's like I get up in the morning and my first thought is, oh, I don't want to go to work. It's like I grab the tool that is not the most helpful right now. But what am I going to do with the screwdriver? Am I going to get rid of it? No, because it can be useful, and it's part of my tools. So what I will do is I will put the screwdriver back in the toolbox and reach and try to get the hammer instead. I'll try to see if I don't have other tools that could be more appropriate in this context. So the same thing here. I wake up in the morning, I feel I'm too tired, I don't want to go to work. Are there other thoughts, other things that could influence me that are more useful in this context? I really like to think of it, it's like a sort of a utilitarian approach to thoughts. But it's inclusive, it's integrative. I don't try to get rid of thoughts. I think of it as everything is potentially useful. I really think that there is no thoughts that is intrinsically bad or wrong or useless. I think it depends on the context. Even a suicidal thought could be useful. It depends on the context. There's been examples in a war, for example, when people preferred killing themselves than being tortured and revealing information that could be dangerous for their fellows. And in that context, perhaps, I mean, it's a question of perspective, of course, but maybe that was better. I think of euthanasia also. I mean, not everybody agrees with that, of course, but from the perspective of someone who chooses to die instead of suffering, you can see that it would actually, it can actually be seen as useful. Of course, it's not a tool that you want to use in any context. If I feel ashamed and I have the suicidal thoughts, and that's a very tempting thought because it could decrease shame. That's the problem is that, yeah, it seems like it's useful, but it seems to be more like the screwdriver when I need a hammer. I checked the questions, so there were some comments, questions. Okay, Cynthia, so you say, I have a client that frequently views diffusion as having to ignore their thoughts. The thoughts seem to have such strength, and opening their minds seems impossible. Mindfulness has not been successful. Any suggestion? Yeah, So really diffusion is not about ignoring thoughts, or ignoring only in the sense of I don't respond to them, I don't act upon to them. But we prefer in diffusion thinking of it as indeed part of mindfulness. So if to be able not to respond to a thought, to an urge, it's better that I'm actually aware of it. It's like my screwdriver. If I don't even realize that I have a screwdriver, I'm going to try to use it as a hammer, and it's not going to work. It's only because I noticed that it's not the right tool that I can then respond to another tool, that I can pick another tool. So I would say with a client that is very attached to certain thoughts, and I actually have some other questions here I'm going to read because they were pretty connected to your question. Here's one. How therapists can manage therapeutically true thoughts in an act-based intervention, such as I am suffering from cancer and I'm going to die within the next month. Or there is another here. I'm not sure I see it here, but the idea is that in some cases, clients are really attached to their thoughts, and trying to diffuse seems like we are invalidating the truth of the thoughts. That I'm really thinking that. So that's one difficulty that often therapists who start doing ACT notice, is that if they say things like it's just a thought, or you're having the thoughts, that typical ACT techniques phrases, it's actually not very well received by clients because they say, no, it's real. It's not just a thought, it's real. There's a question about OCD, very sticky thoughts in OCD or in psychosis. It's situations where clients are not willing to take their thoughts very lightly. In fact, it's part of the defining symptom of these disorders, is that there is a strong attachment to thought. So my advice is to not go too fast with the third step, the step of flexibility. I would mostly target awareness and assessment of effectiveness, while not arguing about the truth of the thought. It's really important to understand that in diffusion we are not we're not arguing with the truth of the thoughts. I'm not saying that a thought is actually doesn't describe reality, for example, well, or it's wrong. It's really not about that. It's about how I respond to thoughts. Like I said earlier, I don't think there is any thought that is never useful, and I don't think, in fact, that there is any thought that can be completely proved wrong. Even delusions in psychosis, I think, can or you know, beliefs in OCD, I think we can always make the case that they are true to some extent. Sometimes it's a bit of a stretch, but you can always come up with a story that justifies the thought. Like, for example, in psychosis, there's all kinds of delusions, like I'm watched by the FBI. Well, is it true, not true? I mean, yeah, we can say it's not true to some extent. There's not a team of special agents at the FBI that are currently working on my case. But am I not watched by the FBI to some extent? I mean, it's part of their job, right? There's always all kinds of things that we don't know. They're reading emails and all kinds of things, or even just having cameras in a city. It's part of it. You can always make the case. Or I come from another planet. Okay, that seems completely out of line, right? That seems completely irrational. There's no way it's true. Well, you know, I can talk about how the universe was created, Big Bang, and everything was part of the same thing. And I mean, I'm not an expert in astrophysics, and also I'm probably saying things that are not exactly accurate, but I hope you get the point, is that there's always some arbitrariness in the way we organize the world for practical reasons. I can come up with a story that will justify it. So the reason why I say that is because I think it's much better not to get caught up into battles of argument. And that's, to me, probably the most interesting thing about diffusion, about ACT and RFT, is to step back from assessing thinking in terms of essential truth. What is really true in terms of more correspondence? Do my thoughts describe reality well in a sort of essential, objective way? Like I said earlier, we try to have a more utilitarian, pragmatic approach to thinking and responding to thinking. So with clients who strongly believe what they think, I try to slow down a lot and be interested in their stories, their thoughts, and progressively to shape their more pragmatic thinking. It can take some time, especially if their rigidity is high, but my bet is always that clients want something to change, especially if they come to see you, to see a therapist. Clearly, they want something to change. It's a little trickier when you work with clients, patients who haven't really chosen to see a therapist, like in prison, for example, or with adolescents in an institution. It can be a little trickier, but it still works. You just have to be a little more patient and to work more from the inside. There's actually a part of our course on diffusion in the ACT track where we talk about doing diffusion with very rigid clients, where I talk about doing a diffusion sort of through infusion first. So you have to sort of dive into the story first, but inside the story there will be elements that are more pragmatic that will start to emerge. So what I try to do is ask clients about how they see the world, their own story, but to shape the more functional contextual thinking. And by that I mean having them unfold their story through the behavioral sequence. And what I was saying earlier, I'm going to put the slide back here, shaping awareness. I'm going to ask a lot of questions that help them notice how one thing leads to another, but with curiosity and openness. I'm not trying to make a point at that stage. I'm just trying to understand, and that's really what I try to communicate to the client. I'm trying to understand them better. I'm not trying to argue, and I'm trying to change them. I'm not trying to change the way they think. I am just trying to understand them better. And by doing that, I help them understand themselves better, but not just the details of the story, that they already know them. And actually, it's not what I'm most interested in. It's not adding more detail to the story. It's adding a more functional contextual framework to the story. It's a sort of filter, if you will. So how do I look at this picture, at their story, through the lens of functional contextual thinking? So the questions that I ask are more about workability, effectiveness, what happened before a response, what happens after a response, in the short term, in the long term. I check for variable schedules of reinforcements. Does that happen always, sometimes? So there's a lot of I show a lot of curiosity, which is generally very well received by clients who are very rigid, because they have a sense often that people don't understand them, that they are a bit alone. So I actually ask a lot of questions, and I drop the agenda of change. In fact, I don't really drop it, because it's part of changing, to be more aware and to have a more functional, contextual thinking. So it actually shapes something already. But it doesn't look like a change, because we're not in that stage of response flexibility yet. It's not about, let's try to do something different. Let's look at our thought as just thought. It's really more about understanding at that stage. I hope that answers already a bit your question. Cynthia, obviously it's something that we'd have to unfold a little more, but that's the idea. It's to not rush, not try to, that's where I would not be too explicit, psycho-educative about diffusion, but I do diffusion by the way I listen to the story and the way I shape the way the story is being told. With clients like that, I haven't found very productive to jump into thank your mind for that thought, or you have the thoughts that. That in general is received with a sense of invalidation more rigidity. If you would like to follow up on these responses, you're more than welcome to pose a question and to ask for the microphone. In the meantime, I'm going to look for other questions that were posted this week. Okay, so there was some question about introducing the concept to clients with OCD related intrusive thoughts. So I said a little bit about it already, but one aspect I would like to say is that when thoughts are particularly distressing, like it can be the case in OCD, obviously, or in PTSD, in psychosis, if, for example, hallucinations are particularly upsetting, I think it's really helpful to warn clients that increasing awareness will be painful, will be difficult, because it's almost guaranteed to happen. If a client is used to avoiding thoughts, like for example thoughts around contamination, triggers anxiety, and so clients engages in all kinds of rituals to decrease anxiety. So okay, now I'm clean enough. It lasts for a few minutes, a couple of hours. If they're used to avoiding these thoughts, being more aware of these thoughts, noticing the thoughts is going to be more distressing. Although it's pretty typical that clients will come back after a week of practicing mindfulness and actually say it made things worse. I'm more aware of my thoughts, it's even worse now. So I should really start that way with shaping awareness this way, more formally with mindfulness. I would encourage you to tell clients that it's going to be part of the process, that it's going to be a bit difficult at the beginning. And there's all kinds of parallels that you can make, like going back to the gym is hard at the beginning, you feel sore, and so the thought that you're going to have is to give up after a couple of days because you actually have less energy. You start to exercise again to have more energy, but after a couple of days, you're so sore that you actually feel much less energy. So explaining that it's going to be part of the process, you can even draw a picture, sort of charts that show that at the beginning things are more difficult and then progressively get better. It's pretty typical of what we observe in exposure, right? At the beginning things tend to be more difficult and over time we gain flexibility. So that's something that I would definitely tell to clients with OCD. The other thing is because of the more traditional approach to problems like OCD, using exposure to decrease anxiety and decrease the frequency of obsessive thoughts, we tend to think that we have to stay exposed to what triggers anxiety for a long period of time. But in fact, we don't necessarily function that way. What we want is a full contact awareness, openness to these difficult psychological experiences. It doesn't have to be necessary for a very long period of time. It could even be for a few seconds, but during these few seconds, what we want is to shape a full contact, really acceptance, full awareness. So that can also be a way of shaping these skills at the beginning. I think it's necessarily easier, but especially when clients do their homework, their practice between sessions, where it's more likely that they will give up because it's difficult. I tend to think that it's more helpful to allow clients to do very short exercises, but during these short exercises to be really fully in touch with the experience. So there's something that you do in session, and then they can practice on their own. And of course, always link the diffusion work to the utility of diffusing. to the utility in terms of values. I think there is no process in ACT that works well if you don't link it to values. Being in contact with the present moment, being diffused, being acceptant, all that doesn't matter if it's not for the purpose of being living in harmony with your values. Sometimes the mistake we make is to focus on the process because we notice that a client is very rigid, very attached to a thought, and we think, oh, that's a problem, so I need to increase flexibility there. But if the purpose is there is no gain in gaining flexibility, in moving toward flexibility, if the gain is not obvious, it's going to be really hard for the clients to make these moves. That's why assessing the effectiveness of responding to thought is so important. And the more rigidity you notice, the more I would focus on effectiveness before flexibility. At the same time, you can reinforce instances, natural, spontaneous instances of flexibility, but inviting clients who are very rigid to be flexible, it's a little hard. It's a little hard. It's often lived as invalidating, or there's you see a pushback because clients think it's arbitrary, and in a way it is arbitrary at that stage because it's not linked to values. Okay, you can keep following up with questions and comments. Oh, I think I saw. So Rhonda, you asked, sorry, linking to what? But I'm not sure what it was about. If you would like to ask your if you'd like to explain a little bit what it was connected to. Take your time. I will look at other questions in the meantime. There is a long question. I think it's related to what I was explaining earlier. I have I'm reading a question, okay, that I received this morning, this week. I have a client that can't seem to diffuse from the belief that she's defective and that her anxiety disorder will always control her life. Intellectually, she recognizes how these thoughts and beliefs control her life, but she feels very pressured to search for the right answer. I believe that she's stuck in wanting to rid herself of any experience of anxiety. She's had multiple successes with diffusion, but she seems to lose confidence in certain situations. Any suggestion? And the same person asked, on a similar note, I had a client who experienced this same type of searching for the perfect answer. When attempting to diffuse from the idea of defectiveness, self-liberating behavior, destructive increases. Self-liberating, I think there was a typo there. I sensed that he needed to view himself as a mentally ill patient in order to not blame himself for all of the years spent in treatment and not living his life. Unfortunately, he then searched for a physical reason for his symptoms and has since left therapy. So I think all these examples are, I think, emblematic of what I was describing earlier, which is a way of responding to our thoughts that is more like essential, essential from essentialism. I need to know what's true. I need to know what perfectly matches reality objectively. I have clients like that wants to know if they are crazy, for example, or if what they're doing is right. They want answers that are not ambiguous. But the problem is they lose contact with effectiveness, with pragmatism. And in ACT RFT, we have a radical stance about this, and it's reflected also by the way we do research, by the science itself, by how we build theories and how we evaluate the theories. It's based on effectiveness, the utility. A theory is not true if it's not useful, if it doesn't lead to a useful application. And that's how we test the theory. So dealing with clients who can be stuck in this sort of loops of coherence, things make sense, they fit together, but that doesn't lead to any effective change. You may have noticed with some clients that you spend sessions talking with them and it doesn't lead anywhere. It seems like they have their favorite topics. They ruminate a lot, or they rehash the same topics again and again. They can even be willing to explore situations from different perspectives, but it's often with the purpose of over-analyzing a situation, to have all the little bits of information to be more and more precise. But there is really a sense that it doesn't lead anywhere, and it can be really draining for you as a therapist, because you feel like these sessions are not leading to any change, any progress. Sometimes you may even start to dread sessions with clients like that, even if you really want to help. But this sense that you just have long conversations that don't lead anywhere can be very frustrating. So I encourage you here to focus a lot on shaping effectiveness. I can even make that explicit by seeing clients. We've been talking for now about a couple of weeks on about these topics, and I feel like we know more and more about it. But I have a sense that it's not. I'm not being helpful. Do you feel like there's been some change, some helpful change so far? And if you can start to agree that it's what we're doing now, it's not making any change, that's a really good starting point. That's also why identifying values is so important when there's a lot of rigidity, because if you don't have a sense that you are being off track, it's really hard to change the pattern. You have to be able to assess the effectiveness of responses, or else you keep talking, it keeps making sense, you keep getting closer to the truth in a way, but that truth is just one truth, and it's not the effective truth. And we often talk about the pragmatic truth criterion in ACT RFT, meaning that what's true is what works. That's our criterion to evaluate what's true. It's a long process, but it's really what we want to shape in client. So Sun is saying, at step 2, you are assessing effectiveness of response to thoughts, similar to evaluating consequences on a behavioral chain. Yes. Although, yes, of course, effectiveness has to do with consequence, but there is a slight difference between noticing consequence and then noticing if the consequence matches what you want. You can do a chain analysis that is very neutral. You know, I woke up, I felt tired, and I thought that you want to go to work, and then I stay in bed, and then I felt less tired, and then I spent time watching TV, and I felt good, and then I felt bad. That's neutral. It's a neutral description of the functional relationship among these different events. Okay, I'm telling a story that's functional. Then, to assess effectiveness, I need to make a comparison. That's what I have here in this slide. I'm going to put it back here. No, actually, that was here. What I need to do to assess effectiveness is to measure the gap between where I am and where I wanted to be, or where I ended up and what I actually wanted. I actually think it's useful to distinguish these two processes in order not to rush. Because sometimes when we go too fast with effectiveness, we may have missed some aspect of the story, some variables that are involved. So I actually like to spend some time with doing the chain analysis without, it's like in a scientific paper. You have the section about results, and that's neutral. You just present the results. And then you have the discussion. And the discussion is about, okay, so based on the results, what can we say? Is our theory correct or not? Okay? And that is the reason why we separate these sections, is that this way you can look at your results with more neutrality, with less influence from your hypothesis. So your question was not over. Then you said, do you most often use a metaphoric example? Do you ever just ask how effective is that, and have you ever acted differently, etc.? Yeah, absolutely. I don't only use metaphors. I definitely also ask simply if it's been helpful. In fact, that's the most common way of doing it. Asking questions about effectiveness in a natural way. The advantage of metaphors, not necessarily formal metaphors. It can be like using something more sort of image to make your question more concrete. Like I could say, for example, okay, so if you were to rate that response, like you rate a movie that you just watched, would you give it a 1 star or 4 stars? Right? It's a metaphor, but it's a more natural way of talking about it, saying, imagine that you are driving a bus and the passengers in your bus. Okay. In fact, there's always a lot of metaphors in our language, even when we don't notice it. It's naturally we use concrete terms because it's easier, especially to manipulate abstract examples. Yeah, I'm glad that you like it, Sun, the movie rating example. I like this idea of rating because we're so used nowadays to rate everything, right, with applications on smartphones, Yelp, and all kinds of reviews that we're constantly checking for reviews and doing our own reviews. So what's great is that it shapes, you can use areas where the client is already thinking pragmatically, so that you shape from something that they already have in their repertoire, and you try to extend this way of thinking to the area, the clinically significant area, what you're trying to change. And so you're also saying, I have clients who can't find a job and want friends, but believes all people are evil. I think this belief gets in the way of both. Is this an example of fusion? Yeah, I think we'd say fusion because there are different thoughts. I have some thoughts that say I would like to have friends, but others that say everybody is evil. And if she actually doesn't engage in trying to develop relationships, then you can say that there is the thought that everybody is evil, that is overriding other sources of influence. Yeah. And Kimberly is saying, in doing this, do you give the client a values assessment first, particularly with clients who go to shame after fusion? Well, there's all kinds of approaches to when it's good to talk about values. I think if you don't have some objective, at least some direction, it's really hard to start any therapeutic work. But you don't have to rush into it either. At the first session, it might be that someone really needs to talk about difficulties and how things have been painful, so you might work a lot on validation and just listening at the beginning, as I imagine you probably do. And so maybe not necessarily at the very first session, but soon you'll need to have a sense of where the client wants to go, even if it's in terms of a specific goal rather than the values. So values in acts, I know that some of you are already familiar with the concept, but maybe not everyone here, so I'll explain very quickly. A value is really more an idea of a direction, not something that you reach like a destination. And so often clients might have very specific goals, like I want to find a job again, or I don't want to live alone all my life, I want to be in a relationship, these sort of things. Eventually, we will try to build a more sense of values, so things that give us a direction that are compatible with specific goals, but they provide satisfaction in a more lasting way than specific goals. And so even if it's like that at the beginning, it would still give us some direction. And this way, we can assess effectiveness. You cannot assess effectiveness if there is not a criterion for effectiveness. So even if the criterion is not perfectly formulated yet, even if at the beginning it's just I don't want to, I don't know, for example, I don't want to be hospitalized anymore, or I want to have my own apartment, this sort of things, it can be a starting point. And then later we may revisit this formulation in something that is more like a value. But yeah. And you know, a way of assessing effectiveness can be informal. It already gives us some idea at the beginning. Say, okay, so imagine that all these problems that you told me about today must have gotten in the way of important things in your life, right? Say, how has it been a problem for you to feel all that anxiety and I don't know, for example, someone who is afraid of public spaces and said, I haven't left my apartment in years. It's the first time today just to see you, but I'm very scared. That's why I came with my mom. And so asking, has it gotten in the way of in your life? What kind of problems has it caused? That's a way also of assessing effectiveness already. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that helps already a bit. I was saying that there are different approaches to when it's good to use to talk about values. It's just because sometimes talking about values early is can be a bit difficult for some clients. You were talking about shame. That's typical actually. Clients almost have a hard time even exploring exploring satisfaction. They might be too ashamed to even consider bring satisfaction to their lives, or they are so stuck with pain, physical pain or emotional pain, that and for so long that it's really hard for them to think of beyond. I don't want to feel pain. That I can tell. I don't want to feel that way, but it's hard for them to imagine what their life would be like in a positive way if they were not so bothered by that pain. So that's where I would explore values in a more validating way. So what kind of problems does it cause? What has been the cost of all of that? But instead of saying, what would you like your life to be like? Because often at that stage, clients have a harder time exploring. It's like it's too far, and because it's too far, it tends to increase to make them feel even more discouraged. I mean, there's a bit of hope, but it can feel like it's too far. We'll never get there. So it's a matter of pace that we adapt to where the client is at. There were some questions about integrating ACT or diffusion with DBT. I hope that's some of the questions I answered earlier, talking about chain analysis gives you some sense. My sense is that the way we approach thoughts in terms of effectiveness is something that can work very well with DBT, but might not be as explicit in DBT. I might be wrong, but I think that the pragmatic stance in ACT is really useful to strengthen in your practice. And in a way, it's always a matter of effectiveness. And we want to help clients have a better life. So what we do is meant to work, to be helpful. But it goes beyond that. In ACT RFT, it's really every exchange is driven by this pragmatic way of thinking. So it takes sometimes a bit of time to learn to change how we lead a discussion. But over time, it's liberating because we never ever get into battles over arguments. It's really just about effectiveness, and that makes exchanges with rigid clients extremely satisfying. I've had quite a lot of therapists coming from DBT in my ACT and in RFT track for the past couple of years, and in my live trainings too. And I think it works really well. What I like about therapists training DBT is that they often have a very good background in behavioral principles, and they are used to doing machine analysis with a lot of precision. And what they often found interesting with ACT is how to still use the behavioral principles, but in a perhaps less structured way. It's a little more conversational, and ACT allows a lot of flexibility with the experiential approach. It's the idea is to help clients build their own observation skills. In ACT, I think it feels less structured. There's still less focused on skill training, perhaps a little more in insights, we could say, than DBT. Doesn't mean that we don't train skills in ACT. It can also be very structured. But I think the most typical, if you looked at an ACT session and a DBT session, you would probably see therapy being a little more directive in DBT. It's more structured, review of homework, whereas in ACT it's a little more. It's perhaps more influenced by humanistic therapies. They're a little less structured, perhaps a little more reflective listening. But at the core of it, behavioral principles are still very important, very much at the core of it. So we're getting at the end of our Q&A. Still a couple of minutes. Let's see if you have a comment or a question before we end. You're welcome to ask it now. I'll look here on my list of questions. I'm sorry if I was not able to answer all the questions, but if you join the ACT or the RFT track, they're a bit different. Actually, you can maybe say a word. There were some asked about the C credits and how the tracks work. So in terms of C credits, you can get up to 16.5 C credits with the ACT track, and with the RFT track you can get 9 credits. So the live sessions, if you attend them, you can then get credits, or if you cannot attend them, you can listen to it, and then there's a quiz. And also every month there's a few questions, we send a few questions that you can answer to get C credits. Somebody asked if about the level, if you're already knowledgeable in ACT. We designed the ACT track so that it's accessible and useful both to people who are new to ACT and people who are already advanced. And it works well, I promise it works well. Why? Because we focus on clinical skills. It starts in September, Kimberly, so you can sign up until the end of August, probably early September. You'll find all the information, again, on our website here. You go to PracticeGround.org, and you go check here learning communities, and then in the menu you'll find overview, tracks, registration. So yeah, it's really focused on clinical skills so that people who start, who never done ACT before, will start practicing the skills, and those who are more advanced will refine their skills. And because I ground my ACT trainings in RFT, and RFT is still fairly new in clinical practice, generally it's new to most therapists. So far, I think it's been working really well. I use a lot of video demonstrations, a lot of exercises to practice between the sessions, the training sessions. So it's a really hands-on, and we cover pretty much all the main points of ACT in a whole year. In RFT, it's more directly based on RFT, and ACT is more an example of doing RFT, using RFT in practice. It's more integrative. We talk about all kinds of therapeutic models. So if you're interested in learning a framework that can help you bring different approaches into a coherent framework, RFT is really great for that. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today for this discussion. And we'll post the recording of this session on our website. We'll send you an email when it's ready, when it's posted on the website. We'll post also the slides, and so you can also let your colleagues, friends know if they were not able to attend, that they'll be able to, probably sometime at the end of this week or next week. It should be available along with other resources that we've posted before. You can go check that already if you want on the PracticeGround.org and on the resources. Well, you're very welcome. I'm happy that it was helpful, and I hope that I will see you again on the Learning Community in September on another training soon. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.